Hi guys, welcome in the new decade, first video of 2020. And to celebrate the new decade I went to a costume party where the topic was your star sign. And I decided to go as Aries, or Ram, or however it's called, I'm not sure. And of course for a Ram costume you need a pair of horns. So that's what we'll be making in this video. And don't consider it much of a tutorial per se. It's really the first costume that I'm ever making, or piece of costume. So I wouldn't say that I'm much of an authority. But you're welcome to come along on this journey with me and watch as I stumble. So I'm Jagelsdorf, welcome to my channel and I hope you like the video. So we'll be making the horns out of cardboard, mostly cardboard rolls. I basically gathered all around cardboard things that I had in my home, and I'm starting with this thicker piece that I'm going to cut in two because I only have one of it, and it will serve as a base for my horns. I just score it with my trusty knife first by rotating it, and then apply a bit more force and saw it through. After that you should have two pieces of the same size and we can proceed. I had this round container, it was a perfect size for the next step, so I also cut it into some strips. And because I hate measuring, I use the piece that I've cut off to make a second piece approximately same in size. It's always a good idea to dry fit the pieces in between the steps to get an idea of where you're going and how you want your horns to bend. And thankfully the container had a smaller cylinder that you use to close it, so I could just cut off this part and use it as a next step. But after that we are going to use mostly toilet paper rolls. So yeah, we've got our 3 steps and you can already see the start of the horn shape, and we're going to model it with the next layers of smaller and smaller cylinders of cardboard. So now I'm just going to cut my toilet paper rolls. While we are making the costume, maybe tell me in comments what sort of costume you would make for New Year's Eve. What's your zodiac sign? Maybe there's a great idea for a next video hiding. Maybe we'll make all the zodiac signs as costumes. After a while I decided that using scissors may be a little bit easier than my trusty knife. With the first few elements ready, we can start gluing them together. I'm just using a bead of hot glue and I quickly determined that is definitely not enough and that we're going to need a lot more hot glue. Basically, the more hot glue, the better. Because the next step is very tight fitting, I put it in first and then glue it in, and then the cardboard roll. I've learned my lesson and put a lot of hot glue right away. And at this point I kind of understood that I didn't really need all the paper rolls that I had, but I kept doing it like this because I already had it in hand. Because as you see, you can just make your cylinders with any piece of cardboard or paper or whatever, just roll it together, because you aren't going to find, you know, like 20 pieces of round cardboard getting smaller and smaller with each step, you know, it would be insane. So we're going to have to cut our cardboard rolls into smaller pieces, smaller strips, and just roll them together and then glue them. So you could have just as easily made it with anything else. And at this point you need to be wary of the shape that you want to achieve. Rams, or Aries is a ram, so they have a kind of spiraling round horn. So after the initial curve I had to change it up a little bit, so you see me angling my steps up. And of course if you use shorter, bulkier segments, your horns are going to be shorter. If you want your long horns, you want your segments to be a lot longer. And now all that is left is to make a second horn for our little friend over here. Which I have done off screen to spare you the boredom of watching me do it. As you can see, they aren't perfectly the same. I could have done a better job, but well, whatever. Once they're on your head, it won't be as noticeable. But we don't want to put just some random pieces of toilet paper roll onto your head, so we have to finish them with some paper mache clay. And I've used a recipe that I've found on YouTube from a very nice old lady making paper mache sculptures. I hope that I've put up the recipe in the channel on the screen right now. It's a rather easy method and you can use all the toilet paper that you've unrolled for this project. I didn't follow the recipe to the letter, so it's not exactly perfect, but it's good enough for my purposes. And you just want to cover your horn entirely with it like icing on a cake. And then use a bamboo skewer or a toothpick or anything and score it to give it some, horn-like texture. It's good to look at some pictures of ram horns in the internet. I didn't do much of research, but I took a brief look to, have an idea of what I'm trying to make. And as you can see, it already starts to look pretty nice and pretty much like horns. And don't forget about the underside. I started with a top because this is the most important part that's going to be seen and I wanted it to look a little better. And when you're doing the bottom, you don't need to stress so much. The random pieces of fiber sticking out of your horn, don't worry about them, you can clean them up later. This paper mache clay needs quite a long time to dry, so we are going to leave our horns for about 12 to 24 hours before painting. Yeah, and that's how they look right now. This is the end of day 1. I had basically the weekend to make them before New Year's Eve, so I had to hurry with painting and mounting them. I'm gonna start with covering them in brown paint entirely. At this point you don't need to pay much attention to any details or anything. You just want the paint to be relatively thin so that it gets into all the nooks and crannies and all the crevices that you've created with your toothpick. It's a good idea to take a smaller brush afterwards and do the places that you might have missed. The next step is to cover it in a black wash or a dark wash to bring out some of the detail. And after the wash is dry, we're going to dry brush the horns or overbrush them with more and more intense highlights, starting with the regular brown that we used as a base color. And you can see the horn on the right of the screen is already dry brushed and the horn on the left side is just covered with the wash, and the difference is really noticeable. So for the highlights, I'm just going to mix the brown with some white paint and with each layer add some more white paint to make it lighter. And I thought it would be nice, it would be cool looking to have the tips lighter than the base. So with each highlight I started a little bit further up the horn. And you can see dry brush as always making its magic. As I always say, a wash combined with a dry brush is a terrain maker's best friend, or prop makers in this case probably. And you probably could do it more exactly, but as I said, I didn't have much time at this point, and also the horns were made in a quite rough manner, so painting them roughly was also kinda suitable. And at this point I've noticed that the horns look kinda dark and weird, so I covered the basal part of them in a yellowish ochre tan, something like that, wash to give it more of a different hue. And I really didn't want too much of it, so I gathered up the excess with a paper towel. And as I said, I only covered about the half of the horn, the darker half that I didn't dry brush as much. And it really did wonders to the model. But it washed out the details a little bit, so I gave it another coat of a light dry brush. So we're done with painting the horns. Now we need a way to actually put them on our head. So let's quickly clean the desk up. So as I said before, at this point I was kind of rushing and just using whatever I had at home. And just recently I had some mini Berliners. So like the fat slob that I am, I decided to use the packaging cardboard as a holding strip for my horns. With my scissors I've cut a few strips, and because they weren't long enough I glued them together first to make them longer, and then I glued a second layer to give them more strength. And it would be probably better to use a PVA glue or epoxy resin or something like this to give it more strength, but as I said, I didn't have much time at this point and I really needed it to be ready for the New Year's Eve party. After I glued the strips, I used my knife to cut some holes at the end where I'll insert a shoelace to form a headband. I also reinforced it with some hot glue and poked the holes with bamboo skewer. At this point I decided that having a cardboard strip on my forehead for the entire night may not be the best idea, that it will probably disintegrate and chafe my forehead a lot, so I turned to an old sock for padding material. I just cut it in half, glued it to my strip, and then cut to size with a scissor. Really nothing fancy, quick and dirty. Here you see the shoelace that I'm going to use. One of my laces in a shoe broke, so I kept the other one. As a true hoarder that I am, I thought to myself, hey, it might come in useful someday. And it did. Now we want to attach the horns, but before we attach them, I'm going to put the headband on and mark the places where the horns will go with a marker. And the headband is really remarkably strong, I must say. And I'm going to attach the horns with a large heap of hot glue, as is the theme in this video. And some more hot glue for a good measure. But I still decided that it wasn't quite enough, that the horns didn't feel stable as they were. So I peeled the piece of sock up and weaved another piece of cardboard in, glued it to the headband, and then glued it to the inside of the horn. And I used a lot of hot glue to do this. And I also squeeze a lot in afterwards for good measure. Now we need to hide the ugly cardboard headband. I had a few ideas. I wanted to paint it and make it look like a leather headband with a Celtic knot on it or something. But as I said, time was short. So I just used a piece of faux fur that I had lying around, cut a few strips out of it and glued it to the headband with hot glue. And an advantage of using a fur like this is that it kinda blends with your hair, or at least it kinda blends with mine. It looks alright and natural with the horns. Also, because of the, furry, voluminous nature, you don't need to be too exact with your cuts and gluing it on. You can always comb or brush the fur into all the places where some cardboard or anything shows through. I also glue the fur to the backside and poke a hole through with an awl. And I also take a second to cover the edge of the headband at the back. As a little extra, for the costume I decided to use a leftover piece of fur as a, manly fur patch sticking out of my shirt. So I just sew it quickly to a t-shirt. And that's how the headpiece looks like. It looks kind of scruffy on the inside, but it holds really, really sturdy. And it looks quite cool in my opinion. And also here's a reveal of the complete costume with some basic makeup. I'm gonna be honest with you. I know this is probably nothing new or nothing special for most of you watching, and probably the results won't be like super amazing for you. but I was really stunned, you know. I always wanted to check this method out for making horns, and yeah, I really didn't expect it to look that good. Although I wore it all night for the party, about, I don't know, 6 or 8 hours or something crazy like that, paper belts held up quite nicely. As I said in the video, it was all pretty rushed and made with materials that I simply had in hand. If I were to make it again and make it properly, I would probably opt for something like a leather belt, but it just wasn't available at the moment, and I had very little time. Anyway, I might look into making more costumes in the future. It was really fun. Maybe another pieces to make a whole, you know, goat man costume, like a Satyr, Faun, Pan, something like that. We'll see what the future brings in costume and prop making. It was really fun. Anyway, if you liked it, remember to like and subscribe, click the bell icon. You know, I know it's annoying to be reminded of this same stuff every time in every video, but it's really important. And yeah, thanks for watching. I'll be seeing you. Bye!